You're listening to GSA Does That, the podcast that uncovers the stories behind the federal agency delivering effective and efficient government. I'm your host, Rob Trivia, and I hope you're having a good day. In today's episode, we'll discuss the crucial task of modernizing our land ports of entry, commonly known as border crossings. Thanks to the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, well over $3 billion has been allocated for more than 50 border station projects. We'll be speaking with GSA's Darin Frost and Josh Malkin from Customs and Border Protection. They'll share details about projects on the northern and southern borders and talk about the challenges and opportunities presented by this landmark funding. And you'll find out who benefits most from these modernized land ports of entry. This episode touches on geography, sociology, and some history. Join us as we explore how GSA and CBP are collaborating to develop high-tech border crossings in remote locations, and all while using the latest green building practices. Thank you for listening. We'd be honored if you subscribe to our show. To learn more about GSA Does That, visit us online at gsa.gov/podcast. Okay, here we go. Well, Darin, thank you for being on the podcast. Before we begin our discussion about modernizing our border crossings, I wondered if you might tell us a little bit about yourself and specifically about your role at GSA.
Sure. I'm the program executive for the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Early in my career, I was a GSA building manager for land ports of entry across the northern border in Washington state. I also have a design and construction background and have been involved in building and planning new land ports of entry prior to assuming my current role in GSA. Never before has GSA been tasked with modernizing so many land ports of entry at once. Normally, we have a couple land ports of entry, new construction projects going on at the same time. Now we have 26. Bill created a unique opportunity for GSA and CBP to redefine a closer partnership in how we navigate this constantly evolving requirements for land ports of entry. GSA and CBP project managers really set the tone for this collaboration on each individual project. They work closely together to ensure the requirements are carefully developed with input from subject matter experts across both organizations. They also work closely together to engage with the local communities where these land ports of entry are located to ensure community input is fully taken into account. Now, programmatically, my team and I work closely with CBP leadership to ensure we're addressing CBP's mission needs consistently across the entire program. We facilitate timely decision-making to keep projects moving forward, and in that regard, we provide direction and support to the project teams to navigate key decisions regarding scope, schedule, and budget. It really is a dynamic program.
Very interesting. Now, Darin, are you coming to us from the Northwest? Is that where you grew up?
Yeah, I'm from the Pacific Northwest. I live just south of Seattle.
So welcome to the podcast, Josh. It's great to have you here. I wondered if you might start by telling us a little bit about your role at Customs and Border Protection and maybe a little bit about your background. I've heard you served in the Navy and you might be a Longhorn fan.
So I am the Operational Support Facilities Director here at Customs and Border Protection. So I have the entire portfolio for our Office of Field Operations, which includes all our land, sea, and airports of entry along both borders and everywhere in between. Border Patrol, which is a lot of our, our Border Patrol stations and the checkpoints. So pretty much all of the operational aspects of CBP from a facilities perspective. We've got about 6,000 facilities that we're responsible for, both leased and owned, leased primarily through GSA, obviously, across the country and a few overseas as well. So it's a pretty exciting portfolio that I'm responsible for. Happy to be here. I have a great affection for the University of Texas, and I watch their sports, especially football, very closely.
That's excellent. It's always fun to have something to look forward to in the fall after a really good summer. Well, clearly I'm talking to two very experienced gentlemen in their roles at GSA and CBP. This should be a great discussion. Darin, we have talked about the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and all the great things it's doing several times on this podcast. I wonder if you might explain a little bit more specifically, modernizing these land ports of entry. What are these dollars doing in regards to modernization for the land ports of entry. How did you figure out the scope, numbers, and what are the goals specifically of these funds?
So, Rob, GSA received $4.3 billion to modernize our land ports of entry across the northern and southern border. CBP received an additional $430 million to help with the fit out of those land ports of entry. The program includes 26 major modernization projects across 11 states. 20 of those projects are along the northern border. 6 of them are along the southern border. We also received funding to perform repair and alteration, paving and roadway projects at 21 locations. We've completed 8 of those paving projects to date in upstate New York, California, and Arizona. We have 13 more coming in the state of Texas. The program also includes repairing and modernizing over 30 inspection facilities for the Department of Transportation's Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. Their facilities are located on the southern border typically, and they're either on land ports of entry with CBP or adjacent to them. And then finally, we are purchasing with bill funding 3 leased land ports of entry on the southern border that are currently privately owned. It is a really big program. The goals for the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law land port of entry program are pretty straightforward. First and foremost, to provide a secure, well-managed border for the inspection agencies that are there, to create jobs and grow the economy, to facilitate trade and supply chain across the border. There's a lot of traffic that goes across the border, to improve the human experience as people arrive into our country, whether it's the first time or they're commuting across the border every day. That's a significant goal for us. To strengthen community livability in border towns, and to be a model of sustainable development when modernizing these land ports of entry. So it is a really broad program, far-reaching, and we're really excited about it.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot of great goals and a lot of work to do. Darin, I'm curious, what are some of the key projects planned across the 12 states?
Yeah, sure. So some of our largest projects are on the southern border. In California, we're finishing the 3rd phase of the Calexico Land Port of Entry in Eastern California. And we have 3 major projects in Arizona. We broke ground on the San Luis Land Port of Entry last summer. It'll be our first net zero port, meaning it will balance the amount of greenhouse gas consumed versus created. In Douglas, we're building a new land port of entry for commercial traffic outside of town. This will redirect heavy commercial truck traffic from the downtown core. And in doing so, this will enable us to modernize and expand the existing Rural Hector Castro port of entry in downtown Douglas to non-commercial traffic only, which will definitely help the local community. Now in Texas, we're in the middle of a design build procurement to modernize the Brownsville Gateway Land Port of Entry. That was originally constructed in the 1950s and is in dire need of modernization. And in El Paso, this summer, we're finishing the environmental review and early design options to modernize the Bridge of the Americas Land Port of Entry. This is our largest land port of entry project, and we're navigating public input on how best to deal with significant commercial traffic through the downtown core.
Lots of great things happening on the southern border. Darin, I'm curious about, what about the northern border? What are some of the specific projects you've got planned?
Yeah, definitely. We have 12 projects across the states of New York, Vermont, and Maine. Most of these projects are at smaller locations with historic structures built over 90 years ago, and they have a lot of constrained sites. Constrained sites mean things like nearby rivers and creeks, railroads, bridges, adjacent residences or businesses, or significant changes in elevation and topography. So we're working closely with CBP, design firms, community stakeholders to determine how best to modernize these locations within both availability funding and those site constraints. For example, Beebe Plain of Vermont is a historic house built right on the border. The street on both sides, one street side is Canada, the other side is the United States. With very little room to expand the port, a lot of community interest in keeping the port the way that it is. GSA and CBP are working closely together with the community on how best to modernize that in a practical manner. Our most remote project is in Alcan, Alaska. This port was last built in the 1970s, serves as the port between Alaska and the Yukon Territory in Canada. It's 5 hours away from the nearest city, and it really is a self-contained community, generates its own utilities. We need to provide residences for the personnel. It even has its own helipad. Given its remote location, harsh winter conditions, designing the new port for long-term sustainability, getting construction materials to the site, those are major challenges that we're tackling there up in Alcan. So just a few projects on the northern border. I could talk for an hour on all of them, but they're all really exciting.
Yeah, they really are exciting, and I love the fact that they're so geographically dependent. I think that's what's particularly interesting to me. You know, how you approach something in northern Vermont or Alaska is so different than how you have to approach it in, say, Texas or Arizona. So it's pretty fascinating, and a lot of amazing projects going on. This is pretty cool stuff. Hey, Josh, your team that you're leading at CBP, I mean, and it's your job to really set the goals out. This is what we really need. This is what we want. You're working with Darin and his team to make this happen. I'm curious how often you and Darin are in touch. I mean, is this a back and forth thing every day? Do you guys meet once a quarter? What does that look like?
Sure. So I look at our team as, I mean, we're essentially the owner's reps. I mean, we represent, and if you will, we kind of coalesce all of the operational and functional needs, the design standards for each of the modernized land ports of entry. So that requires a pretty frequent dialogue with GSA. Sometimes we have standing weekly and biweekly executive level meetings, but sometimes it's daily, sometimes it's multiple times a day collaboration, depending on what the issues are. But obviously a lot of moving pieces with these, significant projects as we hit major milestones or as, major decision points come up, our collaboration will increase both frequency and duration. So, but it's a really exciting program. Like Darin said, I mean, a lot of goodness, really a historic investment in some of our most critical and quite frankly visible infrastructure that CBP is, operates and maintains across the country.
Darin, does GSA work as consultants like with CBP? Are you doing that type of thing, or is it more of like, hey, you are the real estate expert, so CBP says this is what we need, please fulfill this order? Or is it also you're talking to Josh and just saying, hey Josh, here's what some ideas with technology, with maybe with real estate, with how you might go about some of these things. I'm curious about a consultancy, or is it really, is it really just kind of taking orders to say, we're going to get it done on budget, we're going to get it done on time?
Yeah, I would say that we bring a lot of expertise to the table, as well as CBP. The GSA expertise is really in the area of design, sustainability, navigating a lot of complex historic and environmental requirements required by law. But it's definitely a partnership. CBP has a lot of inspection technology with their own subject matter experts. Inspection technology plays a huge role in port design, traffic flow, placement of key infrastructure. And so we can't do that on our own. We're good at designing and building the buildings and dealing with site constraints, but how the technology plays at a land port of entry is critical for CBP to do their mission, to keep traffic flowing. GSA's role is to ensure that all technology is designed and installed in such a manner that it works seamlessly with the underlying facilities that we build. So yeah, it's definitely a partnership, and we rely a lot on CBP's subject matter experts to come to the table and help us design these ports together.
Josh, do the officers that work these border crossings, do you take input from them? Is there any kind of dynamic there? Hey, this is what we really need. This would make the job go better. This is how we could make the mission, faster, quicker.
So a couple of things there. So CBP maintains design standards. In fact, we recently updated our design standard for our land ports of entry. When those standards are updated, there is input from the field to make sure that we are capturing the latest requirements, be it, changes in operational protocols, changes in the types of equipment or other requirements that they may have, as well as directives from above. When we are reviewing and providing our requirements to GSA to execute these projects, those are coordinated with our field offices that are impacted. So, for example, we talked about some of the projects up in New England. Those are coordinated with our Boston field office to make sure that they are. Again, the overarching guidance comes back to our design standards, so we're kind of standardized and consistent across the agency, but we do make sure that we get their input and we coordinate that, so when we provide our overall requirements back to GSA, when they can go and actually do the design and construction, that it does include the field offices and ultimately the officers that fall under that field office's input.
What does a modernized facility look like versus a current facility for an officer that's working the job on a daily basis? How is their job change with a modernized facility? I'm curious what that looks like.
So there is a number of things, and I think if you visit some of our older ports of entry, and we have many, you would see officers working in a facility in many cases that hasn't had any significant upgrades for, it could be up to 40 or 50 years, depending on the age of the facility. So they may be, inspecting vehicles, for example, in very, cramped or substandard conditions, and they're not able to, whether it's maneuver around, whether it's, be able to have the throughput that they would, either desire or require to keep, traffic flowing. And it's not just, there's a lot of things that happen in these ports of entry. I mean, you've got commercial traffic that's going both ways, across the border. You have pedestrians, you have, personal vehicles. In some cases, you have buses. So all of, the officers, I've been to some of our ports of entry where you literally have traffic backed up for, hours because the available, whether it's the number of lanes, whether it's the, number of inspection bays, for vehicles or other equipment that needs a secondary inspection. So the modernized facility will both provide a much more efficient, and you can say this kind of as a general comment about all of them, it provides much more efficient flow for both, pedestrians, commercial, where it exists, and, personal vehicle traffic, so they can, get through, be processed, be screened, or in some cases, additional secondary screening, and then move about their business. So that obviously, when our officers are able to, keep things moving, it provides a significant improvement to their quality of operations and ultimately the quality of life, if you will, for the facilities that they are, that we're giving them. Also, some of these ports are located in fairly remote locations. Obviously, Darin mentioned earlier, the port that we're modernizing in Alaska, which is, actually has a housing component, and that's kind of a unique situation. There's a couple of others like that, like Coburg, Maine, which is located on kind of the northeast or the northwest corner of Maine, and these are what we used to call in DOD, they're hardship duty stations, and it's hard to recruit and hard to retain. So when you provide the officers with both an improved workplace and improved, quality of life from, a housing and support perspective, quite frankly, that's how we're able to maintain and retain our workforce to do these critical missions and really what are, in many cases, very austere and very difficult conditions. I mean, think about working in Alaska in the winter and, being really 5 hours from anywhere and again, having these modernized facilities and improving their ability to do their job and to essentially be able to have some reasonable quality of life is critical to our mission.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like these funds are really helping to, they're modernizing, but they're really helping to retain your officers and provide, better work conditions and a quality of life. That's a big deal.
Absolutely. And think, I mean, these are, our officers are the front line. So when things, again, when traffic's backed up or when people are standing outside or, in a less than satisfactory condition, they're the ones that bear the brunt of those complaints. Being able to provide those new facilities ultimately, again, obviously alleviates some of those issues, but it directly impacts their, again, their quality of life and their ability to do their job effectively.
It reminds me of maybe like when you go to the airport and you go through security. If it's a modernized security facility with TSA,
absolutely,
it's smooth. It's really smooth. It goes really quickly. It's a nice experience for the customer. You're in and you're out, and I'm sure it's a much nicer experience for those TSA agents. So I imagine all of this is really helpful to each kind of customer. You mentioned some of these land ports of entry are very old, 40 or 50 years that they've been modernized. Some of them are even older than that. I was interested to see that even some of them are registered as a historic site. Darin, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how do you modernize a registered historic site, still maintaining that history, yet bringing it to modern standards? What's the challenge there?
Sure, Rob. So, when it comes to historic buildings, GSA has a lot of experience in following the historic Section 106 historic building process, where we really navigate that decision based on the design and what the requirements are for CBP, whether that building can be adapted to meet CBP's needs, the condition of the building, is it still in good enough shape to be reused? So there's times when we come in and remove historic buildings, work through the process and get that approved. Sometimes we move them, not a lot, but that's always an option. And then there's times when we figure out an adaptive reuse for them, and we figure out how to keep that structure, keep the historic integrity of the building, and keep it as part of the local community. And so that's always a collaborative process with the local community, the historic preservation experts. We follow the law and we make sure that it's a deliberative process. Everybody always likes new buildings, and it's easy to build a new building and customize it to meet CBP's mission needs. Sometimes preserving a historic structure works, and sometimes it doesn't. But we have a lot of experience in navigating that process, and there are a number of these projects, especially up in the New England area. We're right in the middle of that right now, working closely with CBP, their historic preservation experts, our preservation experts, to really navigate to good decisions on those projects.
Yeah, I guess GSA would have a ton of expertise when it comes to modernizing historic buildings all over the country. So you've got a wealth of experts at your ready where you can tap into their expertise. Josh, when we think about these rural communities, what kind of impact do these modernized land ports of entry have on the community? Is it a financial boom to them? Is it just more of a convenience thing? Does it just feel good to know that their government is investing in their small community? What does that look like?
Well, there's a couple of different things. So the actual modernization itself, right? I mean, there's the construction impacts, whether it's, working with local contractors or subcontractors and all of the, just like any major construction project, you're going to see impacts from, whether it's people temporarily relocating up there or, patronizing the local economy during the construction. But the positive side is, there, if you want to call it negative and positive, but, there, any type of commercial traffic, any type of, tolling, it's trade and travel. So, the more we can facilitate that through our modernized and, infrastructure is, has a direct impact on the local economy. So, for example, when you get into, and just the convenience factor, obviously, there's a lot of people that live on both sides of the border that, whether they work or live on one side or vice versa, and having, again, those improved facilities makes their daily life and their ability to, be a productive citizen, again, whichever side you're talking about, that much easier. And again, so when we get into, anytime you have to close a port of entry or, even temporarily, you may expect some significant pushback from the community because, again, there's the economic loss, there's the convenience aspect because, hey, I now may need to drive an extra hour to, if I work in Canada and live in the United States or vice versa, that's that much more hardship for me as a person that, that lives there. So yeah, there is a lot of interplay and a lot of, interdependence, if you will, that these land ports of entry support. And again, the, facilitation of trade and travel across, both of our international borders.
Yeah, it never occurred to me until you said that just the convenience, with new construction, we all know this on our highways. The beginning's painful because you're in the construction phase, but boy, when it's done, it really facilitates a nicer experience and a quicker experience for where you're trying to go. So I guess what you're saying is that when CBP and GSA collaborate, get these things done and make these modernized land ports of entry, and traffic can flow quicker and easier, that's a boom right there to the local economies. Maybe you've got a favorite restaurant or whatever it might be on the other side. You're like, oh, this is easy. We'll go because we can do it easy, and it's very simple and seamless. So that's an interesting point that you bring up. I'm curious. We're talking about the local communities. Darin, when we talk about, I know GSA likes to use local contractors when it's possible to do so. With these projects, are there opportunities to use local contractors to modernize these facilities?
Yeah, Rob. So first of all, when it comes to local communities, you asked earlier about travel, and do we have people in these locations? A lot of our effort on these projects is to communicate and work closely with the local communities on the big project that's coming their way. So through the National Environmental Policy Act requirements, we partner with local communities. We have community meetings, planning sessions. We bring them into the design process. And we really do prepare the community for the big project that's coming with their input and ensuring that we design these projects with care. As Josh indicated, a lot of it is about traffic flow. And so, how you flow traffic across the border, usually you have to expand the site, so you need to acquire more land. And so really just prepping the community for all that is step one. Step two is about the jobs that it does create and the business opportunities that come. And so most, if not all of these land ports of entry projects are in remote locations. We've talked about this. This does create a tremendous opportunity to source contracts and labor locally, because they're remote, to the greatest extent possible. GSA does a ton of market research. We do industry outreach. We hold events called industry days to really generate awareness and local interest in the contracting opportunities before we go out to bid with contracts. Many of these projects are over the small business threshold. And so usually big construction firms will do big projects and small business can do smaller ones. So the work really is spread across small and large businesses. But regardless of that, all of our procurements provide an opportunity for either prime contractors or subcontracting opportunities for local businesses to participate in. The key is to make sure they know the work is coming, and we do a ton of industry outreach to prepare the local community to know that work is coming.
I love throughout this podcast, this series that we've done, GSA, it really is impressive that it comes in very respectfully to communities wherever it's doing a project and really ends up being more of a partner to the community than, hey, here we are, we're the federal government, we're coming and this is what we're doing and it's just going to happen like this. So I love that you talked about that, and it's impressive. It really is impressive. It's a great testament to the people of GSA and their partner agencies like CBP that we're working with. Darin, I know that, a lot of these dollars are, part of what's attached to them is really making things better for our environment. And I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about the green building practices that are happening in these modernization efforts. I'm sure there's a lot of cool things going on. Maybe you could share a little bit about them.
Yeah, sure. So, our sixth goal was to ensure that these projects are models of sustainability. Well, what does that mean? GSA is investing nearly $1 billion in addition to the bill money using Inflation Reduction Act funding on these land port of entry projects. that funding allows us to make these projects even more sustainable. IRA funding is being used to provide environmentally friendly, clean construction materials that have a lower carbon footprint than regular materials. We're talking about low embodied carbon produced concrete, asphalt, glass, and steel. Those four materials make up most of the embodied carbon in new construction. In addition, we're designing these ports to be all electric and to push for either full net zero or net zero ready operations, again, to reduce their carbon footprint on the environment. Finally, GSA's design standard is to achieve LEED Gold for construction and to develop these sites to meet Site Silver requirements. But in many cases, we plan to exceed those standards in making these ports models for sustainability through smart design. So a lot of IRA funding is going to help these projects be as sustainable as possible.
Yeah, I mean, it does sound like they're absolutely models of sustainability. Josh, when GSA, it's mandated, it wants to do this, but it's also mandated to do this with the green practices. Do you see that? I'm just going to ask you, do you see that slowing down construction? Do you see it as sort of a limiting factor, or is it really more look like an opportunity? Josh, what is the time frame? Like, when do you see these projects? When are they absolutely completed? When are the funds exhausted? Is it 6 months from now, 6 years from now? Tell us a little bit about time frame.
We're expecting, and Darin can correct me, the last project to be complete at the end of 2031 right now, according to the current timelines that we're working under.
Yeah, I'll just add in. I mean, we're in the middle of designing most of these land ports of entry. We have active design build procurements on about 10 of them, upwards of $1 billion. We've made a lot of progress in the first 2.5 years of the program, getting all these projects moving forward. And so we'll see a number of them enter into construction in 26 and 27. Typically, to build these projects, it's, there's different sizes of them, but you're looking anywhere from 2 to 4 years to construct most of these land ports of entry. So like Josh said, the last one I think is slated to be finished right now in 2030.
Darin, when would a citizen be able to go see one of the first, new projects completed? Like, where could we go to see this is what a modernized border crossing looks like? I'm just curious.
Yeah, definitely. So San Luis, Arizona, that project broke ground last June. And so there's actual site work happening and installation of foundations right now. That project is slated to be done in 2028. And so that will be our first fully modernized land port of entry with the build program that will be completed. That project is going to be all electric, net zero, and will completely be modernized to meet CBP's needs. So we're real excited about that one.
Wow, that's pretty neat. Josh, final word to you. I'm just curious, anything that you might want to add, and I'm, specifically, has it been a good process so far? You've got years to go working together with GSA. Are you encouraged?
Absolutely. So couple things I would add, this historic investment, I mean, we put together, in fact, we had to rebaseline it this year. Every year we put together a what we call our 5-year LPOE Land Port of Entry Modernization Plan to Congress. It's a requirement that is put in the Appropriations Act every year. And truly this investment, essentially rebaselined it zeroed out what our significant backlog of, modernization requirements are. So obviously we have a lot more needs and we're working to reprioritize those. But I mean, it's been a very positive process. We're very thankful for the opportunity to invest and modernize all of these critical, really these critical facilities that, like I said before, are the foundation for trade and travel, on both the northern and the southern borders. The other thing I would add, and even though not the focus, CBP was also appropriated as part of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, $100 million to modernize some of our owned land ports of entry. So most of the land ports of entry on both borders, certainly the larger ones, like Darin mentioned before, are owned and operated by GSA, our partner. And then CBP also does own and operate some largely in the northwestern part of the country. And we did receive, again, a significant amount of funding that we are also executing some smaller modernization projects, nothing on the scale of what, we've talked about for some of these others, but, it's significant and it's appreciated. And I think, it's going to pay huge dividends. So I'm really excited. I mean, this is, every time I visit one of these land ports of entry, whether it's one that we're modernizing or another one, it's, you really get a great appreciation. And honestly, I'm super motivated to come to work every day knowing that we're able to collaborate and provide these kinds of, these kinds of capabilities to our frontline workforce that really are the ones that are making it happen every day and the reason why we have a job. So, yes. Yeah,
that's excellent. Yeah, it's certainly exciting. The scope of what you guys are doing is absolutely massive. I'm impressed. I'm glad you're enjoying it. I'd be overwhelmed with it, but that's why I don't do what you do. So thanks for your service to your country. You've both been doing it a long time, and we're all the benefits of it. So you're doing really important work, and I thank you both so much. And thanks for taking the time to be with us. Thank you to Darin, Josh, and all the incredible teams working this critical mission. I'm always amazed by the breadth of talent and dedication of those who serve our country. I hope this episode highlights the hard work GSA and its partner agencies are doing every day, benefiting both people and the environment. Well, I hope you'll join us in our next episode when we explore some big wins with the government's in-house tech consultancy known as 18F. Hey, thanks again for tuning into GSA Does That. Please consider sharing this episode with a friend or colleague. If you have an idea for a topic or guest, drop us an email at gsadoesthat@gsa.gov. I'm Rob Trubia, joined by our executive producer, Mr. Max Stempora. This episode was brought to you by the General Services Administration, Office of Strategic Communication. I hope you have a great rest of your day.